Good afternoon and welcome to Christ Church. Welcome to the next installment in this year's Christ Church concert series. Thank you for being here. Thank you also to the Friends of Music that provide the support for this series of concerts throughout this school year. Today's concert will be Theme and Variation with George Fergus on the organ, and in just a moment he'll say a little bit more about what that will involve. I told him that if I try to explain what that will involve, he will have to re-explain how what I just said is not actually right. So we'll let him tell it the first time. But also want to thank our ushers and the reception team. These are members of our choir who are helping provide this opportunity of this concert this afternoon as well. And with that, please note that immediately after the concert is done in our Undercroft space, we will have a reception and a time of fellowship together. You can go straight down the stairs here if you hold the rail. It's an old stairwell, or you can go around outside the front steps and along the sidewalk, and there's an entrance into the Undercroft space, which is directly below where I'm standing. Please do join us if you are able. Throughout the concert, you might find yourself at times tempted to turn back and look, and as long as your neck can handle that, feel free to look back. But George said you're also welcome to move around if anyone would like to sit up here so you can see, or if you do find that you would really like to be in one of the balconies where you can see a little better, do feel free to move around. And if you decide in between pieces that you're ready to make a move, feel free to go in the gaps of any of the pieces. But thanks again, and thanks to George for making this possible, and I'll turn things to George in the organ balcony.
Thank you all for being here with us today. This is a really exciting concert that I've been baking, I suppose, on a low heat for a long time, trying to come up with the right set of pieces that will illustrate what I'm trying to show here, which is the evolution of melodies or motifs or themes from one composer to another, not only close in time, but across centuries, across the development of classical Western music as a whole. So the music here will go from the late 16th century, around 1594 at the earliest piece, tracking its way all the way through up to 1987. So not quite 400 years, but very close to it. And rather than choosing one melody, which I think over an hour's concert might get a little bit repetitive, I've experienced that, and that was my feeling then at the time. This will track a few different melodies and give you some contrasting takes on them, if you will. The first pair of pieces comes from relatively early in Western music. The first piece is one movement of a French organ mass by André Raison. And Raison wrote a Passacaglia, which is perhaps the shortest Passacaglia ever written. It's one page of sheet music. And it's based on a theme. And you have to know a little bit about what a Passacaglia is to really understand what's going on with these first two pieces. A Passacaglia is a dance form that originated in the New World and was brought back over to Europe by Spanish explorers around the middle of the 16th century. So Raison is picking up this very new form, which is essentially a ground bass, a repeating bass pattern over which variations are either composed or improvised. It's more or less the structure of modern 20th century jazz, that you have a chord pattern that repeats and then improvisations take place over the top of it. But in all of our music that we'll hear today, there are quite a few Passacaglias, and all of them are written down. I hope there are no notes that will be played that aren't already on the page, though forgive me if there are. So in this one, Raison takes a theme, or writes a theme, rather. And then it repeats. Over and over, not that many times. Bach knew of this piece, knew of this organ mass and the Passacaglia, and probably thought, as I do when I hear this theme, it's about halfway done, but it needs more. And Bach wrote a second half to the theme. And Bach's Passacaglia, rather than being one page, is 27 variations of that 8-bar theme. 26 variations, you're going to hear that exact melody either in the pedal or eventually about halfway through, he moves it to the top voice. And then he starts to vary it in the middle a little bit as he gets fancier and fancier. But then at the end of the 26th variation, it almost feels like the piece ends, and out of that comes a fugue, which, if you're counting sort of generously, is one variation, although the fugue then takes only the first half and layers that in a proper Baroque fugue. And I'll wait until maybe after I've played these two pieces to then explain another Baroque musical form. But until then, here's the Reisholm Passacaglia from his Mass, and then the Bach Passacaglia and Fugue in C minor. The next two pieces are also a pair unto themselves. The first by Dietrich Buxtehude, who was, for a number of months, Bach's tutor, mentor, so to speak. Bach asked for a 6-week leave from his church in the early 1700s, just before Buxtehude died, to go and listen to Buxtehude play and take lessons from him. There are records from the church then, from 6 months later, that say he has not returned, and letters from Bach from where he was visiting Buxtehude those entire 6 months. So he took a little bit of a sabbatical and was so entranced by the work of the old master that he never returned to his job, from which he was fired, understandably. The next piece you'll hear is a 3-part piece, so to speak. A prelude and a fugue, and then a chaconne, all based on almost the same tune, or same melody. There's 2 melodies that get used here. The first that you'll hear in the pedal is just a C major chord. Easy enough. And then the next one is something like that. It takes on slightly different versions depending on whether it's used in the prelude, the very contrapuntal fugue, or the chaconne. And a chaconne and a passacaglia are functionally the same thing. If anyone here would like to split hairs with me, we can do it after we get to the reception, but we'll wait until then to discuss the differences in Baroque music between the 2 forms. The second piece after this is the Hommage à Buxtehude, which Peter Eben wrote, was commissioned to write as part of the 350th birthday celebration in 1987, the German Music Society. So he takes that first theme and from there it vastly departs, but stays very true to that theme in whatever key it might be in. So if you've had any musical instruction, you know about the circle of fifths, in which keys relate to one another by going around the circle, and you can navigate by going from one key to another. And I think of Eben's music, especially this music, which is based on something very tonal, as almost sort of 2 circles that you then spin wildly in different directions and wait to see where they land. So I have to put the microphone down to give you a sense for what it does just in the first bar of the piece. And that's very tame compared to what's about to come after that. But it's all very tightly connected to the Buxtehude motif. And he takes another motif in that piece, which you'll also hear as the subject of a fugue. You're going to get very comfortable with that word by the end of this program. All of those repeated notes were hallmarks of Buxtehude's keyboard works, and it works quite well in the 20th century minimalist musical style that you have lots of those repeated notes. So you'll see them, or hear them rather, sort of doing double duty in that regard. I can't think of anything else to say other than buckle up. So we've danced around from France to Germany and Czechoslovakia, which is where Eben grew up. He was a victim of both the Nazi regime and the Soviet regime, and his music, I think, reflects some of those hardships that he was dealing with and struggling with his whole life. But he remained a devout Christian, a child of a Jewish father, and so was in a Nazi concentration camp for a time during World War II, and then lived in the Czech Republic during the Soviet occupation in the 70s and 80s, and probably lost out on a lot of promotions and other responsibilities and honors due to his devout Christian faith that prevented him from really working his way up through the ranks of the communist system there. We'll move back to France now with really three pieces, although the first is just alluded to in your program. The piece by Clement Jeannequin that Jean Alain is writing his variations on is a French chanson from the late 16th century. And the chansons were a very popular genre of vocal music, nearly all, I want to say all, on secular texts. So it's almost as if, because Jeannequin was a very popular composer at the time, this is sort of variations on a theme by Taylor Swift or so. The tune goes like this. It sounds sort of what you might think of as the stereotypical Renaissance melody, Renaissance song. And Alain, who was a 20th century composer, as you can see, sets this tune very straightforwardly at first, almost as the theme of his variations, and then starts to evolve it in a very interesting way that not a lot of composers since have really tried to hone in on what he's doing. He also introduces a fugue in this, although he calls it a fugetto because it doesn't really get started before it breaks down into something else. And it's a lovely little palate cleanser written in the early part of the 20th century. And then the concert will be closed out tonight by Maurice Duruflé's Prelude and Fugue on the name Alain. And in order to understand that, we have to get a little bit into classical music's idea of the musical alphabet and how you spell something using only seven letters that we have. Here they are. A through G. And if you're fancy, as many people are, there's a secret H in there. It's hard to explain. But in those four notes, you get A, H, B, C. Again, over a glass of wine, afterward, and discussing Chaconne versus Passacaglia, we'll discuss hard B or hard fa versus soft fa and all of that. But the point is, in order to spell A-L-A-I-N, you need more than those 8 letters. So when you get back around to A, you just keep spelling. Teddy, are you here? You are very good at spelling these days, right? What letter comes after H? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. There it is. So when you go A, B, C, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, just ignore that, I gets you back around to the same note, an octave higher, as we started on, A. So A and I are the same note, and then we can keep going. I, J, K, L, M, N. And now you have all 5 letters of Alain's name. You compress them down to an octave, and it becomes... And that's the germ of this piece. That's the very first motive you'll hear, and that gets developed and expounded upon for about 13 and a half minutes over this prelude and fugue. The prelude is very rhapsodic. It has sudden starts and stops and introduces one more theme about a third of the way through that has a tie-in, but you have to wait until the end for the reveal. The theme is which almost sounds as if you know it, but you're not quite sure how to place it. And at the very last page of the prelude, he introduces where he takes that theme from, which is an organ piece by Alain himself called Litanies. And you can immediately hear the affinity between those two tunes. Alain died on the battlefield in the early part of World War I, and this piece, Dürrfeld and Alain were close friends. You can see in your program they were born just a few years apart, and they overlapped at the Paris Conservatoire in their studies. Alain had no reason not to go fight in the military and died in 1940, and this piece is in his memory. The fugue begins very somber and regal, using that 5-note theme, and then expanding it a bit. It's a very sad sort of rising and falling of these intervals, gradually moving their way down in this psi motif as he develops this theme, which then, of course, you get another theme entering and another in different keys according to the rules of the fugue. And you have a very academic, clean fugue, which then comes down to a close to very, very soft. And from that moment is almost like a phoenix rising. In the swell division of the organ, the mixtures start with this swirling, bubbling counter melody. And it's from there to the end of the piece. There is no beat which doesn't have these 16th notes running. It's just ever present as it arises again from there, and you realize that this counter melody does in fact work with a new major variation of the theme. Much less downtrodden, much more hopeful. And the fugue builds into these new entrances an excitement and an energy that was missing from the first part of it, until the piece ends in this brilliant finale on the full organ. I hope you'll join us downstairs for the reception afterwards. Do feel free to ask me any questions at that point, not only about chaconnes, passacalias, and fugues and all of that, but anything else that comes to mind. I hope you enjoy these last two pieces by Alain and Dürrfeld.